So, Sandy Hore-Ruthven, thank you very much to agreeing to this. First of all, how do you define the role of Mayor of Bristol?
Okay. Well, I think for me, the key thing about the role of Mayor is to really lead the city, create a kind of shared vision that everybody can buy into, and that might be tackling climate change or inequality, but at the same time, dealing with the sort of day-to-day issues that people are facing. So, you know, poor public transport or care for the elderly, youth services, education, that kind of thing too. So for me, it's those two things. You've got to create that big vision that we can work with business, but also just tackling the day-to-day things that people face.
Well, following on from that, what do you think the greatest challenges that Bristol faces are?
So in the really big picture, I think we've got two things. The first is, actually no, I'll say three things, because we're just coming out of the pandemic. So the first thing we've got to deal with is the economic recovery of the city. You know, there are particular industries, some industries have done quite well, but things like the creative industries, hospitality, retail, you know, the nighttime economy, clubs and pubs and that kind of thing are really struggling. And I was speaking to somebody yesterday who oversees a lot of those businesses, and you know, people are being made redundant, businesses are closing. So we really have to bring the city back to life again when we can, obviously when it's safe to do so. But I want to do that by you know, running sort of festivals and events across the city and sort of high streets, you know, bringing it back to life. Bristol is a really creative and fun city, and yes, we can do big things in the city centre, but I want to make sure that all of our little high streets and communities have something to celebrate, and that will bring shoppers back, people back to the pubs and clubs and that kind of thing, and make sure that we can kickstart the economy. So that's the sort of immediate one, but then obviously in the long term we need to play our part in tackling climate change and inequality, which you know, that's not something we can do overnight, but we need to start creating jobs in green industries and, you know, building new homes that are zero carbon, protecting our green spaces and making more spaces for wildlife, that kind of thing, but also making sure there's good pay for everybody, particularly people who are caring for the elderly and that kind of thing. So we've really got to tackle those two big issues in the long run of climate change and inequality in the city.
Yeah, just to jump back to the economic side of Bristol, you said that pledged that you'll invest 10 million into the high street. How do you think you'll make that sustainable in the long term? So
what we want to do, there's a lot of high streets in the city. There's a sort of dying a little bit, places like Philwood and you know, up in Hillfield, Stockwood too, where the kind of the high streets are a bit tired, you know, maybe built in the 1960s. But there's often businesses there that really have a big ideas about what they want to do in those areas to bring people back, you know, and that's good for the local economy, but it's also good for the environment. You know, if people can shop locally, they don't get in their car and drive to Cribbs Causeway. So we want those local communities to be strong. And so I've talked to businesses in lots of different places, and what I'd want is for each area to come up with its own vision. Some have talked about sort of, you know, green spaces, some have talked about liquor paint, filling in potholes, some have talked about pedestrianisation, you know, some are wanting to put kids' play areas at one end of the high street. You know, so it's just stuff to make it more livable, a neighbourhood that's a place where you can go shopping but meet your friends or family for a coffee, and certainly a place that you can walk to, which means you don't have to get into your car. So what I'd look at is that 10 million, splitting that 10 million across maybe 5 or 6 of the high streets in the city, get each one to come up with its own vision, and then that £10 million would pay for those things to make those high streets better places to be.
Obviously through the pandemic we've seen the economy take a hit, not just in Bristol but obviously nationally and internationally. And high streets have been, you know, have really suffered as a result of that. Do you think that the high street will survive the pandemic, or in the end are we going to have to revert to online shopping?
I think the high street will survive, but I think it will be different. Already it was changing, you know, all of us are shopping online much more. But I think the high street can offer us something that online shopping doesn't, and that's an experience. You know, you even go into places like Broadmead, where often it's the experience, whether that's sort of food and drink and stopping for a coffee or something to eat, or go to the cinema, or even crazy golf, or whatever it might be. Those are the kinds of things that people are looking for now alongside their shopping, and I think successful high streets will embrace that, because that's an experience you can't replicate online. So I think we need to be forward thinking and not just hold on to how the high street might have looked in the past. It needs to look anew, and we need to be adventurous about that. But I think the high street will survive as the heart of a community, but it will look very different.
Well, from that point of view, do you think that in some ways COVID represents an opportunity for businesses?
Yeah, look, a big change like this always creates challenges and opportunities, and I think for me the job of mayor and running the council and running the city is to make sure that the challenges that brings, so particularly say young people losing out on jobs, particularly those in some of our poorer communities losing out of jobs, it's to make sure that nobody gets left behind, but at the same time supporting businesses, high streets and the like, to really take advantage of the new opportunities that something like the pandemic has created.
Yeah. So as the Green candidate, your party is synonymous with protection and preservation of the environment. What will you do in Bristol to make the city more environmentally friendly, and obviously not just in the short term, but in the wider picture as well?
Yeah. So we've all realised how important our green spaces are. I've gone around the city talking to people, and our green spaces are really important. I want to invest in our parks and make sure that particularly again in the poorer communities, they have access to green space and open space. But also, there are things we can do in our parks to encourage wildlife, and help us tackle the ecological emergency. But probably the biggest thing that I think we can do as a city and as a council in terms of the big one, which is tackling climate change, the only area where our carbon emissions are rising is transport, right? And that's also an area that the City Council has some control over. So I really want to invest in our public transport, cycling routes that are safe and separated from the roads, better walking routes and pedestrianisation too. And so my big headline for that is that we want to invest £6 million a year into our public transport, and bear in mind that the council currently invests about £500,000 a year in public transport, so it's a big investment. That would mean that everybody under the age of 21 would get half price bus fares, and that's important obviously for emissions. More people using buses means less people in their cars, but also it means that young people have access to jobs and opportunities and college and all of those sorts of things which they often don't have, particularly if they live in the outlying areas of the city, Hartcliffe and Withywood and Southmead and places. So for me, that it tackles both climate change and inequality. So really pushing on transport to make us sustainable, make Bristol a world leader in sustainable transport is my vision for tackling the big one, which is climate change.
Yeah, so on your website you suggested that 24% of emissions come from congestion. Obviously one of the ways of tackling that is to create a clean air zone in Bristol, reintroduce car-free Sundays and a city cycle network. But obviously cutting off Bristol from congestion doesn't necessarily mean that the roads around Bristol will be free from that. How do you reconcile those two?
Well, the evidence shows from congestion charging and clean air zones in London and other cities actually is that you do see about 30% reduction in traffic. So people do choose to travel in a different way if they have to pay to go through the city centre or drive into the city centre. Either they catch a bus, ride a bike, or they don't go in the first place and maybe work from home and that kind of thing. So actually we do see a reduction. But the key is then to provide that alternative so that people can, choose to go another way. And this is one of my frustrations with how the clean air zone has been rolled out. We asked for the clean air zone that the mayor finally decided on about 4 years ago, right? And he's only just decided on it now. And the problem with that is that the businesses, so I'm getting calls from business saying, well, how, I've got to change my vehicle now, I'm going to be charged, I'm a plumber or a carpenter or whatever, or I run a bar and I need to get my stock in and that kind of thing. If there'd been 4 years of planning, business could have said, okay, I know in 4 years' time I'm going to have to upgrade my vehicle to a cleaner one. We'd also have time to put in public transport, better walking ways, better cycleways. But as it is, it's going to roll out in the next 6 months. So business doesn't have the time to plan for that. And for me, what's important is that we have that long-term vision that we are going to reduce car use. We need to reduce car use by about 40%. That's our overall aim in 10 years. So that gives us 10 years for business needs to know that, so that they can then plan to operate in a different way. But they don't have to change now. They can plan for it. We can plan as the council to invest in better public transport. You can build the cycleways and the better walking routes that mean people really do have an alternative. So it's important to give people a good lead in to it in order for the businesses to be able to respond, and for residents to be able to respond and plan.
To play devil's advocate for a moment, obviously we all agree that the environment has to be on the top of our priorities. However, the two of your main points kind of conflict in the sense that you want to re-energise local economies in the high street, and equally you want to put the environment first, which in the short term will cost businesses more. Obviously in the long term, being environmentally friendly is economically beneficial, but in the short term it will damage businesses, and they're at a point where they can't really be damaged anymore.
Well, I would disagree, and I think this is where good planning allows business to, to adapt. In my day job running Creative Youth Network, we've built a lot of buildings, right? So we've kept our youth clubs open, and for example, health and safety is now just a part of building buildings. You'd wear a hard hat. Everybody who works on a building site is safe. Now that costs a bit extra, but that's a thing that's absorbed. That's a cost that's absorbed into the business. We can do the same with the environment. It's just new. Business will adapt, and it's absolutely fine. I don't actually. Of course, people will worry about it, but clean air zones, for example, have been introduced into London, Paris, across Europe, even, and 1 or 2 places in the UK. In fact, Bath has got one now. It actually hasn't affected business at all. In fact, in Bath, it's only 2 or 3 months in now, but Bath is a cleaner, better city centre now, and actually potentially more people want to go there. And all the evidence of sort of things like pedestrianisation in London has seen an uplift of about 30% in business. So I think the green future is one to look forward to, actually, that will be economically active and vibrant. But I understand that people are worried about it, but we just need to take those steps. And I hope that we'll realise that an economy can flourish and be green at the same time. And I think we'll prove that, but I get that people are nervous, but that's why I suggest voting green. We can prove it. Bristol will be ahead of the game rather than behind it.
Yeah. To move on to a bit more of a governmental topic, you've promised to hold a referendum on the very position of mayor in 2022. Which is an interesting stance. Why do you feel that it's necessary to hold that referendum? Okay,
so I haven't promised to hold a referendum. That's the other parties are doing that. There is the city can hold a referendum. The mayoral system was voted in nearly 10 years ago, and part of that law said that the people of Bristol could choose again whether they want a referendum to keep the mayoral position or not. So 2 of the other parties are promising to hold a referendum. We're not. However, if the people of Bristol want that, then if 5% of the people of Bristol sign a petition saying they want a referendum, then by law we have to hold that referendum, and of course we would hold the referendum, and whatever the outcome of that, we would of course abide by it. So, but I'm less interested in the system and how it works. I'm more, it's not perfect. It needs changing a little bit, and I can talk about that. But actually, I think people just want stuff to get done. They want houses built. They want emissions reduced. They want air to be cleaner. They want to see their businesses flourish, children to be educated, the elderly to looked after. I think people are less worried about whether it's a mayor running it or a committee running it. I think they actually want to see change, and that's what I'm interested in. That's what I've done during my life as a chief executive, and that's the approach I want to take to becoming mayor.
obviously a lot of change can be conducted by the mayor, but it can also happen through the West of England mayor, which I think is the reason why this movement has gathered so much momentum, hence why many parties are advocating for it. What do you think the power of the Bristol mayor is now? Do you think it's been lessened by the introduction of the West of England Combined Authority?
I don't think it's been lessened, but I think that the Bristol mayor must work closely with the West of England mayor. The reality is that's where the money is. So if we're really going to invest big money in public transport, for example, so one of my pledges is to get the West of England mayor, persuade them, whoever they are, to repurpose the road building budget that exists and put that into public transport. And there's a good example. There's a plan, it's been there for a long time, to build a South Bristol ring road that would go through green fields around part of the south of Bristol. Now that's, we don't know the exact cost, but it's several £100 million for sort of 4 or 5 miles of road. Now that would pay for a whole new Metrobus setup in the city. Now that to me is a far better way of spending the money, but that is West of England money rather than Bristol money. So if I was mayor, I would absolutely have to work with the West of England Combined Authority to persuade them that that was the best way of spending that money.
Could you talk a little bit about the basic income trial?
Yeah, so there's an interesting thing. So the universal basic income is an idea that's been around for a long time. The Green Party have had it as a policy for a long time nationally. And the idea is that everybody would get a basic income. So if you are a citizen of the UK, you would get a basic income. So everybody gets it. Now there's debate about what sort of level that should be, but basically it means that all of your basic needs would be met. It would, pay a basic rent. It would pay your, for the food needs that you had, if you have a family, for sort of basics like clothing and that sort of thing. So what it means is that nobody ever has to worry about their basic needs being met. And the sort of slightly counterintuitive thing about it, people say, oh, well, it'll just make everybody lazy. But actually, then the trials that have been done in Denmark and elsewhere, actually it does the opposite, because what it stops happening is very many people who are earning the least, and maybe they're on piecework, they're working for Uber or Deliveroo or in low-paid care work or retail work. Often they have to keep taking any job they possibly can simply to keep the money coming in to keep themselves and their family going. Whereas if you have a basic income, it means that you can take a few months out to, say, train in whatever it is you're interested in, care work, hairdressing, it doesn't, electronics or engineering, whatever. So it also allows you to take time out to care for your children, for example, or care for elderly parents or disabled siblings or whatever. It also allows you to take a bit of time out, say, to improve your mental health if you need it. And so actually what it's proved is that it makes people's lives much more stable, and therefore allows people to really move on in their life. We'd really like to have a trial of that in Bristol, and that's something I'm committed to doing, that if I become mayor, we give it a try, for sort of a couple hundred people and see what the results of that would be.
Yeah. I'd also like to hear you speak a little bit about the 1 billion City Leap programme. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, okay, so that is a programme that's actually been around in Bristol for a long time. The idea is to get the private sector to invest in things like renewable energy, community heating systems. The idea is that the council sort of gives its assets, its roofs, its streets, some of its council homes, allows the private sector to invest, and then the private sector gets the income from it, but ultimately it allows us to reduce our reliance, say, on fossil fuels, for example. So it is a programme that's been around. Actually, it started under George Ferguson, the first mayor. It's taken rather too long, as far as I can tell, to get anywhere. The current mayor sort of promised that it would all be up and running within in his term, but nothing's happened. It's got a bit stuck with consultants and that kind of thing. So a lot of it's behind closed doors, unfortunately, because it's kind of it's a commercial arrangement. So there's not very much more I can tell you about it until if I became mayor, then obviously I could find out more about it. But look, I think it's a good idea. I think it's a way of getting a really big investment in some really interesting ways of generating electricity for our communities that's carbon free. It would create loads of jobs, and yeah, I think it's a good thing and something I'd really look to push forward and get started in my term.
Obviously, the reasons behind your policies are more important than costing policies themselves and practicalities, but in 2020 the government phased out a lot of central grants for local government. And obviously your policies are quite expensive with the COVID pandemic. How will you make your policies cost effective?
So I'm a chief executive, so I've taken a small East Bristol charity, turned it into one of the largest of its kind in the UK. So I do know about money. I'm not somebody who's going to make wild promises, and sometimes, you know, my green colleagues go, why can't we do this, that and the other? And I say, well, if you can't afford it, then you can't do it. That's really important, that we're not going to make wild promises. So everything in our manifesto has been costed. Some of it, like the City Leap, is getting private investment. Some of it, like the investment in the high streets, does come from city council funds that we would repurpose. And then some of the big ones around housing, we would borrow against the existing council housing that the council already owns. So the council owns about nearly 27,000 homes across the city. So we can borrow against that, and we can borrow against that to pay for new council homes, for the insulation of existing ones, which would reduce emissions by 75%. So it's like a mortgage. You can remortgage your buildings, and that's paid for by then people paying rent in the council home. So it's no cost to the council taxpayer. Your council tax won't go up, but that way we can build new homes and tackle our climate emergency. And there's loads more things I'd love to do. I'd love to build sort of big wind farms and, you know, experiment with kind of electric cars. I'd love to say that we could invest tens of millions of pounds into cycle lanes across the city and you know, in public transport. And we can do that if we can persuade WECA and central government to invest. And I'd love to see Bristol as a green city that was really leading the way and proving the point and pulling that investment in, and I will absolutely fight for that. But I'm not going to make promises that rely on other people to invest.
Obviously, the Green Party has been gaining popularity, especially in recent years with Extinction Rebellion, and Bristol is, well, as you said yourself, quite a left-wing city, quite progressive. What could your win as mayor mean for the Green Party from a national perspective?
It'd be huge. Look, the Green Party currently runs the council in Brighton. Obviously, we've got one MP. What we think that our policies and our vision for the future is an exciting one. It's one that actually is good for the economy, it's good for people, it's good for equality as well as the environment. And by running a city as the size of Bristol, I think we could prove that that it works. And if you can prove that it works, then others will go, gosh, look, Bristol's doing this, that and the other, we can do it as well. And so it should have that ripple effect across the country. So I think winning in Bristol would have absolutely obviously a local impact, but I think it would have a really good impact across the country and potentially even across the world too.
Just a few questions from me. I think you'd agree that it's really important to involve residents in the decision making, and as a mayor, it's important to involve these people. So how do you plan in involving these residents in the decision making within Bristol, be that transport or housing?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think again a mistake that's been made several times over the last few years. In fact, just down the road from here, the Western Harbour was a classic example of that, where the mayor got some technical and engineering people to kind of come up with some plans for replacing the road system that's there now, plonking a load of housing in there, presents it to the public, and everyone goes, what? We go, we didn't know what's going on. It's sort of coming out of the blue. So I think you have to start with local communities, and you have to start with residents. So if you know that you want a new plan to build new housing, or to reroute a road, or to put in new public transport system, you absolutely have to start with those communities. And so that's the first thing I would ask the officers to do, and I as mayor on the really big ones would go out and just listen. And often, you find really good examples. I was in Southville the other day, and again the council had come up with a plan for what's called a livable neighbourhood, so how to make it more pedestrian friendly, more cycle friendly. But they'd come up with a plan. Now we ended up having a sort of an impromptu sort of community meeting in the middle of the road. Lots of people came around as we were walking and gathering, and started talking about, well, we could do this, you could do that, and they came up with some, frankly, much better ideas than the council had come up with about how to do it. And if the council had listened first, maybe they could have come up with a plan for the whole neighbourhood which was better than a few people in a room with technical expertise, which of course you need, but it really doesn't work for the local community. So it's absolutely at the heart of what I want to do, is to listen first and then come up with the plans with the technicians, if you like, and then roll that out. And I think we'll find there's a lot less resistance and a lot more support for the new ideas.
And post-pandemic, where do you see the cultural events of Bristol going? So
obviously we need to wait for when it's safe. However, I would look to invest. And I don't think it needs to be huge sums of money to pay for those companies, those organisations, those freelancers to really celebrate our city when we can, ideally over the summer, because that's the best time to do it. But again, as I said, with the high streets, to really celebrate the high streets in the city, not just the city centre, with shows, with exhibitions, with fun stuff for kids, as a way of kind of bringing people back and bringing the city back to life, and keeping those companies and creative organisations going.
Bristol's an increasingly restless city, I think I'd describe it as.
Yeah.
We're having a lot of demonstrations here every Saturday, and a lot to do with the environment. And then, of course, after George Floyd's death in America, a Colston statue was brought down. What would you do to address that, or perhaps you might encourage it? It's good to see that.
So look, I'm all for peaceful protest. Peaceful protest has changed our society for the good, whether it's votes for women, and equality for disabled people, or people of colour. Protest is a thing that's raised issues in a really important way that people have to take notice of. Greta and the climate strikes have done a huge amount to raise awareness of those issues. And so I'm very supportive of it. I'm not supportive of it when it gets violent, either from the protesters' side or from the police side. But I think it's a good thing. It's part of what makes Bristol a great city to live in. Is people are engaged. They are political and want to see change, and Bristol is at the heart of that.
Yeah. So to round off, in 4 years' time, Sandy Hore-Ruthven has been mayor for 4 years.
Yeah.
How do you measure your successes?
So I think it was a good question. So I think we've two key things is we've moved closer to our net zero target, and we've really started to plan and implement some of those things that I've talked about: public transport, cycling, walking, and we've started to build some of those new council homes that I've talked about. So those are the two key things. I think I hope that by then we'll have recovered properly from the pandemic. And that we'll be back, with a thriving economy. But also, then the sort of final thing is, I really hope that a green-led city is starting to lead the way in the country, and that we're starting to see people looking at Bristol and going, they're doing things a bit differently. They really have taken the bull by the horns, and they're investing in low carbon technologies, low carbon business, really good sustainable transport systems, and it's working, and we might copy that.
Sandy Hore-Ruthven, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.